Welcome to Lizards of the Toast, and I am excited today because this deck I've been working on since Halloween, and I had some setbacks with it, and I worked on another deck, as you guys saw, the FOMO deck, and we put this one aside for a little bit, but now it's complete, and we are loving it. It's so powerful, and Mr. Crandall, what did you think about the deck?
Well, sometimes that is better.
Sure is. It sure is. And this is the inspiration for this deck was not only GORYO'S Vengeance, but Dead is Beta, which is our mono black budget reanimator deck. So let's get right into this. Let's get our creature base here. Now, because this deck had a lot going into it, and it is more complex, I think it deserves a second video where we're going to explain the pieces, how they work, talk about some deck tech, maybe show some hands. And of course, you guys are going to see some wonderful gameplay with this against some metagame decks. So, Stitcher Supplier enters the battlefield or dies, mill 3 cards. And of course we want to do that because...
Well, sometimes that is better.
That's right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these to create our second hand in the graveyard. An Emperor of Bones here. Look at him. I don't know if he's an Emperor. An Emperor generally has a name, right? And is probably going to be a legendary creature at least. So maybe not an Emperor. Maybe just a skeleton with a chip on his shoulder. At the beginning of combat on your turn, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard. For 1 and a black... we get the 2/2 that does that. Okay, so we can adapt 2. So we put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Emperor of Bones, put a creature card exiled with the Emperor onto the battlefield under our control with a finality counter on it. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So that is very good because the creatures we want to bring out do a lot of damage and they're very big, and we'll get right into those. So this kind of is, in a way, a GORYO Vengeance on a stick, kind of, but we're just running 2 of these because they're not necessarily, oh my gosh, we need so many. We tried 3 for a while, but we got too many of him. So Vampire Hexmage is a key player in this deck, and like I said, we'll do like a deep dive in another video coming up here. The Hexmage has first strike. It's a 2/1 for 2 black. Sacrifice the Hexmage, remove all counters from target permanent. So that is going to be important for us. So we have 1, 2, 3 of those. Now, Boggart Trawler. This deck only has 15 lands. So the Trawler is really important along with another land/creature, which isn't a flippable. We'll get into it. So Boggart Trawler. When Boggart Trawler enters the battlefield, exile target player's graveyard. That's really good because that takes care of what? Takes care of Flage. Ooh, very good. Takes care of Soul Trader combo decks. Very good. Takes care of GORYO'S Vengeance. Good. Takes care of Murktide. And it is a 3/1. So that kind of 3/1 for 3 with that graveyard exiling, plus being able to use it as a land. Of course, we're running 4 of the Boggart Trawler. So, Fulminator Mage. This is where the Panza play comes in here, where we're destroying land. And I know it's butthole. It's not nice. It's bad. But for 1 and 2 black or 2 red, sacrifice the Mage, destroy target non-basic land. Out of here, mister. See that land? Boom, gone. So that's going to be really relevant, especially in a deck where we're bringing things back from the graveyard. But then again, I should say we're not necessarily always bringing things back. It's not, but we have 4 Fulminator Mages just because unsafe terrain ahead, turn back, and that's the sign near the former Perta Crane. So, Perta Cairn, not Crane. Oh, goodness. Learn to speak, young man. All right. So, being able to sacrifice this and bringing this back and putting our opponents back a land is just going to really allow us to just create a whole lot of nonsense. So here is a card that I would consider one of the golden pieces in the deck. We have Overlord of the Baelmerk. It has impending cost of 5. So that's 1 and a black. If we cast for that impending cost, it enters with 5 time counters on it. Oh, boo. And isn't a creature until the last time counter is removed. Oh. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter so slow. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. So what do we have that can remove counters from things? We have Vampire Hexmage. So Vampire Hexmage is very good to remove those time counters if we haven't cheated this out of a graveyard another way. So whenever Overlord of the Baelmerk enters or attacks, we mill 4 cards. That's great for us. We're just going to fill our graveyard hand. Graveyard hand. Because why? Why should we do this? Why? Why?
Well, sometimes that is better.
Indeed. Indeed it is. So we're running 4 of these because they're so cool. And they're so cheap, too. I mean, this card is going to go up. Just because, even with the impending cost, that sets a timer. Because if you cast this turn 2, that is a timer. But we're not really concerned with doing that. And 3 and 2 black is really gettable in this deck. Because it uses an old, fun mechanic that I love so much and haven't gotten to play in so long. Street Wraith. So, we are going to have... we're going to use these retro ones in another deck. So we did order another play set of these in just like standard. So it looks nice in the deck. We don't have these retro frame. But right now we have the retro frame. So we do what we can. That's the plan, Stan. Street Wraith is a discard. It is meant to just fill our graveyard. That's what we want. And to get that, pay 2 life is fine to draw a card. So that's just going to help us fill the graveyard, draw a card. Not to mention we can get a Swamp Walking 3/4 if we have to bring this out of our graveyard somehow. And it's not necessarily the worst thing to exile this after we've drawn a card off it, exiling it, and then when we pay the Emperor of Bones to bring this out, if this is what we need to bring out, that's just fine. Run 4 of those. Troll of Khazad-dûm. A great cave troll, I think. There's no hope of escape that way, said Gandalf. And he actually led him right into the clutches of Balrog, a demon from the old world. So that wasn't smart, Gandalf. But what can I say? Wizards are always where they're supposed to be when they're meant to be or something like that, right? So the Troll of Khazad-dûm can't be the target, or can't be the target. Can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. That's huge. Huge. Imagine if it had trample, but it doesn't. And that's okay because 3 creatures is a big ask. The swamp cycling, though, is where this comes in. Now, this is what I was talking about. It's like the Boggart Trawler in the way. Let's say we have a troll and 1 swamp in hand because we only run 15 swamps. Or 15 lands, not necessarily 15 swamps. But the swamp cycling for 1, we're guaranteed a swamp. And a lot of times having 4 of these, okay, even though it's a 5 or a 6 mana creature, we're able to cast this so much by just persisting it out of the deck or out of the graveyard. So having a 5/4 come out is great. And hard casting this is easy too, using an old forgotten mechanic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4. Now here is one of the sweet, sweet machines. Do you guys know how cheap this thing is right now? Does anybody know? Google it. Get off the computer. Get off your phone. Well, get on your phone. I guess not get... Google with your TV, friends. Google on the old dial-up phone there. Get your Game Boy Color and Google. I'm just kidding. Look this up, though. It's really cheap. I'll save you the time. You can get these for like under $4 in some cases. Archon of Cruelty. Do you remember how expensive this card used to be? Does anybody remember the hot dog card that this used to be? So, whenever Archon enters, and it is 8 mana, but it has flying, it's a 6/6. And whenever Archon of Cruelty enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, loses 3 life, we draw a card, and we gain 3 life. This is saving the day, man. This saves the day. And if we can get this in with the skeleton, it's great. When the Emperor of Bones does this thing, great. When we persist it, great. Any way we can get this onto the battlefield is just great. Even if it is sacrificed with a finality counter on it, I don't care. Because this does huge damage, especially when it comes out hasty. Hasty and pasty. No time to waste it. All right. So onward and forward. We're doing good. Look at 10 minutes. Okay. So let's talk about this small little package here. A small little package. Don't. All right. Fatal push. 1 black. Destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. That's a lot of stuff. But revolt, destroy that creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less instead of a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. That's going to happen. It's going to happen. That happens. Especially in this deck. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, who did that? Another one of those. Another one of those. All right. So persist. In the tight-knit town of Mist Meadow, death is less important than duty. Because why? Sometimes that is better. Isn't that right? Oh, Mr. Crandall. Mr. Crandall fell asleep. He was supposed to say, that is better. Telling me the Timmy Baterman story and you fell asleep, you old goon. All right. So return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 card on it. Who cares? The creatures we're returning are so big. And if we want that -1/-1 counter off there really bad enough, we can always just sacrifice a Hex Mage. I don't necessarily think I've done that. I'm pretty much using the Hex Mage to remove those suspend counters. But 1, 2, 3, 4 persists. And sometimes we can sideboard one. Sometimes. So, Thoughtseize. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. You lose 2 life. So sometimes this is us, okay? So on turn 1, if I can Thoughtseize an Archon of Cruelty into my graveyard, and I have to reveal my hand, that sucks. Turn 2, I can pop that thing out with a Persist if I have the right stuff in hand. So that's what's important in this deck. You got to have the right stuff in hand, or you got a mulligan. And a lot of times you do, because the deck is simple but complex and you need to know what you're dealing with and how to deal with it. And the sideboard gets even more interesting, but we're running 4 Thoughtseize. Paying life is not that big of a deal in this, because our finishing move, or a way to stop us from being finished by the opponent's damage, would be us cheating out the Archon anyways. So getting life with that is huge. And if we bring it out with the skeleton and it has haste, it is just brutal. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 swamps, right? I count those right. I swear I had 8. 8. See, look at that. Guy can't even count. All right. So 8 swamps, and the reason I'm real careful to have 8 basic swamps is just in case we can always cast anything. We'll have the land if we're Blood Mooned, and we're always Blood Mooned, man. Are you guys have Blood Moon problems where you are? I have them here. So let's get right into why this is awesome. Phyrexian Tower, add 1 black, sacrifice a creature, add 2 black. So we're usually going to be sacrificing the Stitcher's Supplier. That's our kind of our best bet, because it gives us such a bonus of milling 3 cards when it's sacrificed. But then the sacrificing of a creature and adding 2 is great. So we're running 2 Phyrexian Towers because it's a legendary land, and we can't afford to be running more. Now here is the land I was talking about that kind of has a little used in like old school modern decks. Crypt of Agadim enters the battlefield tapped. Not the best, but real advantage comes from this. So add 1 black to the mana pool. So it's just a black producing land, but here it is. Pay 2 and add 1 black to the mana pool for each black creature card in your graveyard. That is huge. So I have produced turn 3, 6 black mana with this. Okay. So 6 mana turn 3 is pretty dang good. And I have hard cast turn 3. Overlord of the Balemark, which is a wonderful thing to do. And I'm still going to work it out, but gold fishing with this as well is very entertaining. So we'll probably do a gold fishing video with this because it's really fun to goldfish. So 1, 2, 3 Crypt of Agadim. You could go 4 if you really wanted to go all in with this, but I just don't feel like that many tap lands is something I want to do. So, especially because I have these Lochthwains here. Lochthwain, there's teenagers in the bar. There's people doing all types of... Lochthwain, you're fired, man. Get out of here, Lochthwain. Because Lochthwain is in Roadhouse 2. Many people do not know Lochthwain is the hero in Roadhouse 2. I think it's his last name. I don't think there is a Roadhouse 2. I just like to say Lochthwain in a southern accent. But I digress. We couldn't have a show. We couldn't have our episode without digression, right? And regression at that. Lochthwain's cool. Enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a swamp. You know we're going to because we have 8 of them. Tap it, add a black. We can pay 1 and 3. Let's just call it 3. So 1 colorless, 2 black, and tap this. So let's call it 4, right? It's 4. Draw a card, then you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. By the time we're doing that, we probably will have like less than 1 in our hand. And if we have 1, we lose 2 life. Who cares? We get to draw. So some card advantage there. Now let's talk about the sideboard and what is in there and what isn't and why that is. So I used to come up when I play paper out and about, always mono green Tron, right? It's one of my favorite decks. I love it. I've never really owned a Tron deck, but I switched off like at game stores, like playing and like trying Tron. So really fun. But I haven't been coming across them as much. So that being said, a certain card that I used to run, like sometimes a play set of in decks I don't run in here. But for coming across Boros Energy in these small creature decks that are really flourishing in the post-Fury era, Path of Peril is a great card. So it's got that cleave. That really isn't something that's important to us. I ran a card in here to kind of like justify having the cleave, like a white silent clearing. So running silent clearing, I cleaved a couple of times, but it kind of goes against what we're trying to do because we have big creatures. Like we don't want to destroy our creatures. So I was like, I don't need that land hurting me for 1. It's not worth running that land. So we don't care about cleave. We're just going 1, 2, 3 and destroy all creatures with mana value 2 or less. So that takes care of our tokens. That takes care of our Ocelot Pride. A Johnny that takes care of his tokens and just wipes it. And this deck stomps the heck out of Boros. It really does. Even Mardu, the energy decks do not do good against this deck. So we're running 4 of those just to deal with those. And if we're going against energy with any of those small creatures, we're bringing that Path of Peril in, right? 4 of them, whatever we got to do. But we're not talking about sideboarding. This is not the deck tech. Don't forget, big guy. Come on now. Don't digress. Look at the artwork on this. It's worth the extra pip there, isn't it? No, it's an instant. It's a little bit different. Destroy target creature or enchantment. You lose 2 life. So this is really good, especially with those Crypts of Agadim, where as early as like turn 2, you can start planning ahead and having that kind of mana anyways. So by turn 3, we should have like be getting a lot of mana value. That's what happens in the deck. If you mulligan correctly or stick with the right hand, you should have like huge mana advantage like as early as turn 3. That's when you really want to just... So, Withering Torment to deal with pesky enchantments and giant creatures. And that's all that is. It's an instant. So, if we're tapped, we can't use it obviously, but if we're planning on using this and we've sideboarded it, it's in our hands. I'll tell you one thing. I like to keep the mana up. Surgical Extraction. My favorite way to get rid of fetch lands. So somebody fetches, turn 1, they go first, they fetch. We have Surgical Extraction in hand. We name whatever they say, Arid Mesa. They're gone. So their fetches are gone. That's why I love Surgical Extraction, and that's why there's 3 in the deek. Duthie Voidwalker. Now, okay. The card that I ran besides this. One moment.
The person you put up there.
Oh. Okay. It was the 2 black where destroy target land that produces colorless. I cannot think of the name of it at the moment because I haven't used it in a while. Because again, I haven't come against people playing Urza's Saga. I'm the guy playing Urza's Saga most of the time in the 8 rack, which I don't play anymore because it just got beat all the time. Let's face it. So, Duthie goes in instead because Duthie controls graveyard shenanigans. So if a card we put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. That's so good. And I've actually played out of graveyards like things like lightning bolts, things just to get that little bit of damage in. And I wasn't even trying to use Duthie in those games like that. I was trying to use it just to control what was going in the graveyard, and I didn't want things in there, and I wanted to get that extra 3 attack in with Duthie. But what's funny, I couldn't believe it, but I actually used Duthie to get a couple lightning bolts and then totally took out my opponent, which was really fun. So Damping Spear is going to come in against obvious things like Storm. Even anything running cheap spells. Any deck that's trying to flood the board, do things cheaply and do things freely. Each spell a player casts costs 1 more to cast for each other spell that players cast this turn. If a land is tapped for 2 or more mana, it produces a colorless instead of any other type and amount. So with this Damping Sphere, I figure if I do come against a Tron deck, I will have the means in these Damping Spears to deal with it. And I think these can be just in that sense. And the mana is the same. It's 2 colorless or 2 black for the Break the Ice. That's it. Break the Ice is the other card. So I ran in place of Duthie 3 Break the Ice and 3 Damping Spears. But now the way the games have been going, that seems to be where we like to be. Look at that. It's a relic from the old 8 rack. Well, thanks for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as you can enjoy this kind of thing. And what was it again?
That is better.
Oh yeah, that's right.